Hi everyone, Evan Alexander here. Thanks for joining me for another tutorial. I'm excited. Today we're going to build moving lights in Cinema4d. We'll use Redshift, and we'll also take a look at moving light rigs over from Vectorworks and swapping out those lights with these cool moving lights to make your renderings go a lot faster and a lot easier. I'm going to link below to the light that we're going to make today, so you can download it, you can use it in your projects if you want, or just pick it apart to help understand better what makes it tick. Once you understand the concept, you can apply this to pretty much any kind of moving light. And so I hope that you'll make your own inventory of lights that you can use, and that this saves you a lot of time and makes your rendering life easier. So let's jump right in and get started. Let's start with Arobe Megapoint. So this is a symbol that I brought in from Vectorworks. I just downloaded the standard symbol off of their website. I've moved it into Cinema4d, and I've just combined the parts and pieces to give it the least amount of parts possible. So I have the C-clamps, we have the base, I have the yoke, the head, I have a lens in there, and then I've added my Redshift area light here to the front of the lens. And we'll look at this a little more carefully down the line. So then the only other thing that I've done to this is I ran these parts through Cinema4d's remesher just to give it an all-quad topology and keep things kind of cleaner. The original symbol that comes in is kind of messy and triangulated. In doing this, I did change the shape of the light slightly, but this is really meant for distance rendering and not for like hero shot close-ups. So I don't think we're really going to notice, and it's never been a problem before. And then I have everything here stacked in this parent-child relationship so that we have this chain of items moving from the top to the bottom, and the children will follow the movement of the parents. So if I grab the yoke here and we come in and we start to rotate it, you'll see that the head and the lensing and the light will move with it. And if I grab the head here and we adjust the pitch of that, you can see that we can kind of tilt this. So this is the critical part. You have to get this kind of set up in this fashion for us to then be able to rig it from here. So now that we have the light set up, let's take a look at the rigged version of it so you can see it in action. We'll come back later in the video and talk about how to rig it. But first, let's just show you what it can do. So I'm here now with the rigged version of the same symbol. So this is just set up the same way that we just talked about, where everything's a parent-child kind of hierarchy. But now I've built this user data, so I can come in here and I can spin the yoke off this slider. I can tilt the head, and I've given it limits so it doesn't go beyond kind of the normal extents. I can turn the Redshift light on and off inside of this, and I have control of intensity and exposure, and then the volumetric intensity and the spread. Since it's an area light, it's really the cone angle, but we're using spread amount instead. And then, of course, the color. So I've just built all of this with the Espresso into this one panel where I can control this single light here, right? Now, important to mention that to make this work with volumetrics, you need to have a Redshift environment in here. This is critical. And so this is under Create Environment, Redshift Environment. You won't get any haze or any beams if you don't have this in the scene. So let's take a look. I'm going to back up a little bit here, and we'll come back here, and let's just start the interactive renderer here. And so here it is. If we start to move some of these settings here, you can see that I can pan the yoke here, and we can tilt the head. We've got our Redshift light on and off, so we can turn it on. And then we have intensity. So we can kill it if we want, or dim it way down. And then the exposure is just kind of an extension of intensity. This is kind of a weird thing about Redshift, but that's how the light's set up. So I gave control here for both of them. And then we've got a separate slider here to add volumetrics in and the intensity of that. So kind of you can control the amount of haze. And then we can adjust the spread. So we can go, I limited the width here to what I thought was kind of reasonable. You can go further with the actual light, but I just like to limit it because I never really go beyond this. And then if I bring it way down, you get kind of into like Sharpie kind of beam territory here as well. And then we can just adjust the color of all of this. Let's turn the intensity up a little bit. And you can play around with the color. Now, the other critical part, besides having the environment here, is in my Redshift like render view and in my outputs, I've turned on the bloom and the streak here. Without this, you don't get that lens flare, that ping in the same way. So this is a critical part of the equation that's not really tied into the light. It's more tied into the render engine. You can also turn on a little lens flare if you want. And so these are all adjustable, right, as a rendering effect. So you have to kind of dial this in based on, taste, really, how hot you want it. And, it may be different per camera shot depending on what you're kind of trying to do. So that's another important part from the Redshift side. You need to have these post effects turned on, and you need the Redshift environment to kind of make it work. So now we've got this light working, and I can really easily make these adjustments to the geometry and the actual light kind of all in one control pad. So now if we want to build a system of these lights, it's really easy. Let's get rid of this for a minute. And so all I'm going to do here is I'm going to make an instance of this whole assembly, and I'm going to put that into a cloner here. So I've already done this, and we can hide our original symbol here. Let's back up a little bit. And so now we've got the instances of this one master here, hang 01. And so if let's turn on our renderer again here. If we turn this on, now you can see here we've got multiple lights going. And then as we kind of play around with this, we're able to move the whole system and kind of play around with it at once. So there are obviously some limitations to this system because what's happening is all the lights are kind of in sync and moving together. So if you want to get into, kind of rolls and ballyhoo kind of, multiple targeting, then that's where this system kind of breaks down, and then you have to get more kind of customized within it. But in general, for most of what I do, this really kind of covers a lot of ground in kind of what we need and what we need to do. So here I've built out a really simple scene in Vectorworks. It's just two pieces of truss here with a bunch of movers on them. I'm just going to keep everything in this one Roby light today to keep things simple for the tutorial. But obviously your rig would have different lights on it. So to get this into Cinema4d, we're just going to do kind of our standard export. So I'm going to say File, Export, Export 3D, Export Cinema4d 3D only. And I'll keep this on final quality Renderworks. And I'm going to just grab the geometry. And I'm just going to make sure that export symbols as render instances is turned on. This is really important. And so we'll export. I've already done this, but we'll do it again. And we've saved this out. All right. And so now we're done here. inside. So let's go ahead and make a new scene here. And now we're just going to merge in that scene that we just made. I don't want layers, lights, or cameras. I just want geometry. And if that worked out, it did. It brought everything in for us. Now, we've told it twice that we don't want layers, but it still insists on bringing this none class layer over, so we're going to get rid of that because we don't need it. And then you'll see here that what we have is, we really just need these guys. We don't need those. Bye-bye. So I've got my design layer here. So I've got curved truss, straight truss, and then I just grouped together all these. So these are all instances of the Roby light. And here, these are the circle instances of the Roby light. And then here's the one kind of master symbol that's hiding away at 0, 0, 0 in our world. So that's nice. And a side note here, for some reason, unbeknownst to me, when you bring truss in from Vectorworks into Cinema4d, it explodes into like a million parts and pieces. And you can see there's a lot in here, right? So what I usually do is try to flatten this up, because this is now, how many objects is this? I don't even know. It's a lot of objects. We only need it to be one thing. And if you have a lot of truss in there, you're maybe adding thousands of objects to your scene that you don't need. So I'm just going to grab all of these. I think I probably had them already grabbed, but we'll do it again. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say connect objects and delete. And that is going to just mush this all, flatten it down into one layer here. I'm going to just center our axes on it. I've added my axes controls into my workflow here. And then same thing with the straight truss here, where it's all in a group. I'm just going to grab all of this, and I built a shortcut here. So I'm just going to connect and delete, and then we'll center that up. So, so that's just a little bit of housekeeping. But then now we have this one mega point master, and then all of its instances are what's distributed along here. Now, here's the really cool thing that happens is these instances are referring back to this one mega point symbol. But what it's actually referencing here, if I click on this, you can see it's referencing Roby megapoint. So it's actually referencing the folder, not the actual geometry of the light inside of it, the folder. And what this means is we can swap out the geometry inside of here, and that will update all of the instances, but nothing will move, nothing will fly like off where you have it set up and where everything is kind of placed. So this is great. So let's go back to our first scene. And I'm going to just grab this mega point here. I'm just going to zero this stuff out here so that we're not just coming in at some kind of weird angle here. That's fine. So I'm just going to copy this to my clipboard, and I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to just paste this right in place. So now I can take this whole rig, and I'm going to put this inside of the megapoint folder. And you can see that everything now is starting to kind of come together here. Let's move in on this a little bit. It looks like my things are just a little bit out of alignment here. I'm going to turn off this annoying work plane. And so I can come in here and just kind of tweak this a little bit just to line it up, just so that everything from a geometry standpoint is where we want it and need it. And that way, nothing is going to kind of move, right? So I'm just overlapping our rigged symbol onto the raw geometry. Everything looks pretty scary. But now, all this stuff that came in from Vectorworks, we don't need it anymore. And so now, we're close here. Now, we've got everything kind of rigged up. And all of these lights now are going to be controlled from this one system. Now, what's the one thing that we haven't done here that we have to do? we have to add in a Redshift environment, right? So I'm going to add the environment. Just get this out of the way. And so now if we fire up our renderer here, turn this on. So you can see now we can see stuff. This symbols folder, we can actually hide this. So the light is turned on, which is great. So we're hiding the master symbol. And if you had, multiple different brands and types of fixtures in here, they would all just stack up here in the center. And we can hide all of that. And then now if we come in here and start to turn this stuff on here, so let's turn on the light and let's turn on the volumetric intensity. Why are you not working? What have I done wrong here? Oh, the light is actually not turned on. There you go. Way to go, dummy. So it looks like I turned up the exposure instead of the on-off switch. There you go. So now we're starting to see here. Now I also have to come in here, right? And let's tilt the head up on this a little bit here. And you'll see that it's working, but we don't have bloom and we don't have our streaks. And let's see, if we turn on flare, does it get crazy? Yeah, flare gets crazy pretty fast. We'll turn the intensity way down on this. I'd say flare is optional, but bloom and streak is what you really want. And then again, like I say, dial those in to taste. And so now you can see that without a lot of pain, we're able to kind of put our nice cinema rigged light in and swapped out with the lights that are working inside of, from Vectorworks inside of Cinema. So that's great. The problem with this, of course, is that we've got every single light working off of one, and these are different systems, so we want to do different things. Like, what if we want the circle truss to be at a different angle or a different color than the lights in the back, right? We definitely don't want all of our lights run off of one system, right? So this is really easy to update and fix. This is the other thing I like about this system. So this is Roby Megapoint Hang number 1 here. And so it's inside of this symbol folder here. So let's rename this symbol straight. And so we'll keep this one for the ones on the straight truss. And now I'm going to take this whole assembly and I'm going to just copy it. I'm just holding control and dragging. And so I'm going to make another one here and we'll call this one curved. Obviously, use cleverer names than I'm doing. So now we've got 2 master symbols, one for the straight and one for the curved. So I'll come back to my instances here. Let's give us a little more breathing room. Come back to all of these mega points that are on the truss, and I'm going to select the instances. And now you can see that these are pointed and referencing back to the straight symbol. We want them pointed to the curved symbol. So I'm going to take this curved and just drag and drop it into the reference object field for all of these. So we can do all of these at once. And so now these are pointed to a different symbol, right? You can see where this is headed. So once again, let's fire this up and turn it on, and we're kind of, nothing has changed because we haven't updated the light yet. So if I come back to the curved symbol, and now if we start to change the color here, or we start to play with the tilt of the head, now we have individual control of things over symbols. I'm sorry, over systems. So that's great. And so this is really how I do it when I'm moving kind of plots from Vectorworks into Cinema. And then I update and replace the lights with my rigged lights. And then I get into kind of writing cues. Here's the bummer, because there's always a bummer. The way this system is set up, where the symbols came in as instances and everything's kind of organized this way, this is dependent on these lights inside of Vectorworks being symbols. And if your lights have been converted into lighting instruments, they will not carry through in the same way. What'll happen is each individual light will come through as its own piece of geometry. It will not be an instance tied to a master symbol. Wah, wah, wah. And this is a real bummer and something that I've been trying to get the people at Vectorworks to fix because lighting designers want their lights to be lighting instruments. That's how they position them and rotate them and focus them. But it breaks this functionality inside of the system. So when I'm given a light plot to move into rendering mode, what I do is I go back and I take all of their lighting instruments and I hit, Control K, and I dump the lighting instrument data out of it and turn it back into just being either a 3D or a hybrid symbol. The obvious problem with this is that the rotation of the light is gone. So if you've got things on ladders, if you've got things on vertical truss, if you're lining angled scenery with, light tubes, then all of that data gets lost. So I have to then move the rig over to Cinema4d, and then within that, I have to reposition all the lights. It's not great. Usually I have to do it once per show, and I, grumble about it for a few hours, but then I just kind of get it done, and then I move on with my life. If you do have to do that, one thing that's good to know here that can kind of save your life is this. If I grab all of these lights and I try to rotate them, then they all move as a whole. So that's not great. But if I select all of these lights and I select the rotation tool, there is this per object transform checkbox. And so now with this checked here, if we rotate, it's going to rotate each object around its own center point instead of as a group en masse. So if you do have to go back and kind of re-rotate 600 moving lights on your rig, this little checkbox can kind of save your life in making that possible. I wish I had a better answer for you. I don't quite know how to get around this. Bringing in 600 unique pieces of geometry that all need to be textured and updated is just a no-go for me. So unfortunately, that's where this system kind of falls apart. But once you get used to it and once you kind of do it once for the main rig, then you're good. Obviously, there's revisions and things will change, and you'll still have to do it. And you can curse Vectorworks for doing that. Better yet, go to their wish list on their message board and, keep hammering them to kind of see if we can get this updated. So that's the only bummer, but I still think that the rest of it is worth it. And having these rigged lights in here can really speed up your workflow for writing the light cues once you actually get into doing the rendering. So next, let's take a look at how to set up the rig. All right, let's take a look at how the rig works and set one up. I want to preface this by saying I am not a rigger. This is hobbled together from YouTube videos, websites, trial and error, and a lot of breaking of things and then fixing them. So something surely will go wrong in this part of the tutorial, but here we go. So this is the same light that we've been working with all along here. And if we open up the Espresso rig here, you can see that this is what's driving it. So it's really simple. It's very straightforward once you kind of know what everything is and what the terminology is. And so there's 3 parts to this. There's the user data, and we'll talk about how to set that up. And then there are these nodes in the middle here, which are called range mapper nodes. And these are the ones that, surprise, surprise, map the range of motion or intensity or whatever parameter we're setting. And then on the right is the geometry, really, like the things that we're working on affecting here. So we've got the yoke and the head here because we're rotating those. And then everything else is just parameters that we're adjusting for the area light. And then the last one here is color, which doesn't need a range. It's just a straight shot of color from one to the other. So this is the system that's involved, and we'll set one up here from scratch. So I'm going to turn this off and turn on this. So now this is unrigged. This is where this whole tutorial started, with this parent-child hierarchy of geometry built into the system, right? So the first thing we need to do here is build our user data, right? So I'm going to come back here. So I'm going to just select the whole light, the assembly here, and I'm going to come to user data, and I'm going to say add user data. And this dialog box will pop up. Now it's started our first one for us, and it's called it data. So let's call this one yoke, and we'll say okay. So that's the name of it. And now we're looking for an interface. And so it defaults to float, and float is like just a normal entry text field. So that's good because we definitely want to be able to like dial in a specific number. But what I like is this one that says float slider. And this gives us both. So this is going to give us the entry field and the slider to manipulate. So that's great. Now, unit by default is set to percentage, and sometimes that's right, like if we're talking about intensity. But today, for the yoke, we're going to rotate it. And so now what we want is degrees. So we'll change that to degree, and you'll see right away it just assumes 0 to 360 degrees. So we'll start there. The default value of where it's going to start is 0, so that's good. And then the steps are just what degrees do you want kind of in between the movements as you move it up. So you could up this if you wanted to rotate only in, 10-degree increments. You could set it up that way. But we'll leave this just like it is. And then while we're in here, we'll just add one more piece of data. So I'm going to click add data, add another one. And this one we'll call head. So let's just get the geometry moving, and then we'll come back later and add the lighting system into this. So this works pretty much the same way here. So it's called the head. We want to be in a float slider interface. And we want to go from not percentage, but we want to go to degrees. And we'll say 0 to 360 degrees. We'll just leave everything as is. And then we'll say, okay. And so now you can see here, it's added a tab for us for user data. And we have our two fields here, and we can move our sliders. But nothing's going to happen yet because we haven't actually hooked any of this up or connected this to anything yet. So let's do that. So now I'm going to come back to our main assembly kind of folder here, the envelope that's holding the whole light in it. I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to choose programming tags Espresso. And when we do that, it's going to add for us here a blank node field. All right. Don't worry. We're going to be okay. Espresso is not as scary as you think it is. So, okay. So now the first thing we need to do is get our user data into here. So I'm going to grab the whole assembly one more time here, and I'm just going to literally drag and drop it into the Espresso field. And so now we have this node here that is essentially our user data. Though it's missing our inputs, nothing is there yet. So we have to actually tell it which ports to add here. So we're going to go into this red corner here to the output, and I'm going to just click on it. And here are all the different options for outputs that you can put out of this node. We're interested at the bottom here in our user data. So we're going to start with the yoke. And then we'll do that again. We're going to click on the red, come down to user data, and now we'll add the head. All right, so now we have our outputs, right? So these are basically the same as these. And as we change these, this is where it's going to tell the system things are changing. All right, so this is the input. And what we need now is the output, right? So we're going to have to add in our geometry. So we need a yoke and we need a head. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to literally click on the yoke object and I'm going to just drag that guy in. And then I'm going to click on the head and we'll drag that in as well. So now we've got both of these. And just like before, as you can see, we brought these in and there's nothing in them. So we have to now tell the input side here, the blue, which ports we want to add to this, okay? Before I do that, I just want to note that with the yoke, if we come here to the coordinates, you can see that it's the rotation in H, hull. That's really the only rotation parameter that we're worried about because this doesn't rotate in these other directions, which is handy. And same thing with the head. The head only rotates in the pitch. And so P is the only parameter here that we need to worry about with that, okay? So I'm going to come back here to our Espresso. And so for the yoke, we're going to click on the input and we're going to come to coordinates, transform, rotation, rotation H, right? I'll leave this up for a sec so you can see it. So this is the only parameter that we're interested in for the yoke. So I'm going to say rotate H, and now it's added that input port. And then we'll do the same thing for the head. We're going to click in the blue, and we're going to say coordinates, transform, rotation, and this time it's rotation P. We're just affecting the pitch. So we'll say rotation P. All right, we're getting there. So now we have our user data and we have our geometry, but now we need a range mapper to kind of tell it what its capabilities actually are. So I'm going to come over to the X pool and I'm just going to search. It's already up here. I don't know why from the last time I searched, but if I search for range, this will come up. And then we'll just drag and drop the range mapper in. So if we click on the range mapper, you can see its attributes here. By default, the input range is set to user defined. So we know, because we're dealing with rotation, just like our user data, we're going to set this to degree, and our output range will be the same. And so now here you can see we've got 0 to 360 on the input, and we've got 0 to 360 on the output. So that's good. And then we can, let's hook this up now. So I'm going to just connect this, and I'm going to take the output into rotation H. And if we close this, if we come up here and again, click on the assembly to bring up our user data. And now you can see that we've got rotation on the yoke. So there we go. Let's go back into our Espresso. And now we'll do the same thing for the head, right? So we're going to drag a range mapper in. And we're going to set the range mapper to degrees. And we'll just leave this at 0 to 360 right now. And then we'll just hook the system up. Connect the nodes. And now, if we come back to our user data, you can see that now we have rotation. All right, so this is working, but we want to kind of change some of these parameters because look at this. I can actually tilt this light and rotate it and pass it through the yoke, which is not great. And then the other thing is on the yoke, this will rotate around 360 degrees. But what I would really rather is that I'd rather that the slider sit in the middle at 0 and give me the option of rotating 180 degrees one way or 180 degrees the other way to kind of control the front and the back. And the head, same idea. I would like to be able to tilt it up, but I would also like to be able to tilt it in the other direction, in the negative, but I'm capped here at 0. So I can overshoot, but I don't want to say, 270 degrees. I want to say -90. So we have to adjust some of our parameters to make this work. So no problem. We'll come back here. So we'll go to the yoke, and let's start with this. So now in the yoke, it's set from 0 to 360 for the input. And what we really want here is minus 180 degrees. Well, this is what I want. Maybe you want it differently. You can do whatever you want. And we want our upper limit to be 180. So all the way to the left and on the slider will be minus 180, and all the way to the right will be positive 180. And then we want to do the same thing here for our output. We want our input and our output to align in this case. So not negative, 180. Okay, and so we've updated that. And now if we close that and come back here, you're going to see that it's still not right. Why is that? Well, we told the range mapper that's the range of motion, but we didn't tell the user data, and the user data is what drives the actual slider. So let's come back here, click on user data. This time, instead of add, we're going to say manage. And this will take us back to our user data. And I'm going to come to the yoke here. And so now, instead of its min and max being 0 to 360, we're going to change this to reflect and update what we've done in the range mapper. And now you can see the yoke is at 0 and it's centered. And if I move it to the left, it's going to rotate 180 degrees that way. And on the positive, it's going to go 180 degrees that way. So again, you can set this up any way that you want. Let's do that again, and we'll fix the head just so you can see the process. So for the range mapper here on the head, my input stops at 0, which in this case is straight down. But I want to be able to actually tilt it into negative degrees to get it to go, upstage instead of just downstage. So here, I'm going to set this to negative 360. So this will actually give us the option from the range mapper's point of view of going full rotation forward or full rotation backwards. But when we come back to our user data here, manage user data, for the head, this is where we're going to set it up a little bit differently. So I figured out from working with this instrument before that really 120 degrees in either direction is about the most that you want to get out of this light. So we're going to set it to negative 120 for the minimum and 120 for the maximum. And then we'll say, okay. And now you can see that this one has now come into kind of where we want it to be, just like the yoke, where if I go back and forward, and also this is now limiting my rotation so that I can't actually tumble the head through the neck of the yoke there. So this is great. So there you go. Now we have our rotation all set up for the yoke and the head, and these will just always work together any way that you want. All right, I think we're ready to rig the light now. I promised you I would screw something up, and this is probably where it's going to happen. Before we do anything, let's just do a little housekeeping here. We need to add in a Redshift environment, right? So our volumetrics work. So let's put that in now so we don't wonder later why it's not working by mistake. And so let's just go back to our original light here for a second and take a look, because the user data gets a little bit different here when we get into these other areas with the lighting. So I've got on and off, intensity and exposure, volumetric intensity, the light spread, and the color. And so you can see here that on and off is still a slider, but it's basically, I've set it between 0 and 100, but the step in between is 100%. Because the light is either on or off. It's not partially on. Intensity is where we'll control kind of the brightness of it. So we want this to be all or nothing. There is probably a way to make this a button or a checkbox. I'm still learning, and so I'll let you know when I figure that one out. But for now, I thought the cleanest solution was to make a slider, but basically it just has two positions, all the way on or off. When it comes to light intensity, if you've worked with Redshift lights, you know that some of the numbers and the values are kind of wacky. Like sometimes your intensity is, 250,000 units, whatever that means. So whenever I tried to kind of run this in between a logical 0 and 100, it just was not getting bright enough for me. It would kind of max out at like 1 on the intensity multiplier within the light. So I decided in this case to actually just bump it up to 1,000. And that seems to work pretty well and get it bright enough. I think I did the same thing for the exposure. Yes, I did the same thing for the exposure. And so this just gives you your whole scene will burn out if you max both of these out. So I just wanted us to have the most options there, but it's probably overkill. Volumetric intensity actually kind of works in the opposite way, in that you don't need very much. There's a very small amount of space within the actual Redshift light that you want to move to be able to kind of really control the visibility of the volumetrics. So in this case, I went min and max to 10%, and I'm stepping it by 0.5% to get into the kind of finer numbers. I'm just showing you this now so that it's not a surprise when we get there. We will walk through this step by step, so don't worry if you're frantically writing this down or screen grabbing. The light spread, same idea. If you go to 100%, I feel like the light just opens up too much. So I limited it to 50% just to keep the cone in kind of a reasonable kind of way to go. And then the color is slightly different in that with all these other ones, our data type has been a float because we're using this float slider, which just means like it's looking for, kind of numeric data. Light color obviously is not. And so when we get there, we're going to change our data type here to color, and I'll show you that. So it's all just set up kind of a little bit differently, okay? So let's come into our kind of partially rigged light here. We'll turn this guy off, turn this back on. And so let's come in here and say, once again, manage user data. And so here we are. We've got the yoke and the head here all set up. And so the first thing we're going to do here is just add more data. So let's make this RS light on and off. And so this one is going to be a float slider, just like the other one. It's going to go 0 to 100, but this one, I decided to make it step by 100%. And as I said before, there's probably a better way to do this, and I look forward to figuring that out soon. But for now, this will do kind of what we want. So really, the slider just goes like on, off, and it works. So now we need to add another set here. And so this will be RS light intensity. You can obviously call these whatever you want. And this is our kind of standard setup here. It's a float slider. The only difference is I set this to 1,000, not 10,000, 1,000. And I think that I did set the default intensity to something like 10, just so that when we turn the light on, something happens and you can kind of see it come on. So we could probably, forgo on and off and just use intensity, but somehow I like having a switch in there. So let's keep going here. And this one is going to be RS light exposure. And this is set up the same way as the intensity, where I'm going to set this one to 1,000. I left the default value here at 0 because I don't necessarily want this to contribute to the scene until I manually tell it to. So that's good. We'll add in now our spread to control our beam angle. And so this was also a float slider. But again, this one, we limited this one to, 50% is what we did. And so we'll leave that as it is. And then I need to add in yet another one here. And this one is going to be the volumetrics. Just say volumetrics. And so this one is a float slider. Now this one is the one that is minimal. So I changed this one to 10% at the max, and I changed the step here to 0.5 instead. And then the last one that we need to add here is the color. So we'll call this RS light color. And fix my bad typing here. So this is where it gets different. So the data type is not a float on this one. You can see, look, there's all these different kinds of data types. We're looking here for color. And when we do that, the interface changes to color chooser here, right? Which is kind of what we're used to. So that pretty much takes care of itself. Now, the only thing is, let's see if I can fix this here. Can I change the order? I can. So in my lights, the volumetrics comes before the spread. And so just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to change that up. So as you can see, I'm glad I made that mistake, because you can see you can drag and drop these and rearrange the order of these however you want. And so I think this is it. It's, I maybe screwed something up here, but we can always come back in here. Okay, let's jump back into the Espresso here. So now we have our new user data set up right over here. And so now we need to get all of this user data over into the Espresso node with our user data. So same thing, we're gonna right click here on the red input, come down to user data. And so the first thing we do is lights on and off. And then, so we're just gonna add these in. I'm gonna try to keep them this time in the correct order. So now I have intensity, and then we have exposure, and then we have volumetrics, and then we have the spread, and finally the color here. So we've added all of those. Oops, I think I missed color. Let's try that again. Oh, here, right. Color, it wants to know if you want to control the individual channels. We don't. We want to control everything. So we'll say our light color for all of it. Okay, and so that's good. All right, so our user data and our node system kind of lines up now. So now we need some geometry. And in this case, the geometry is actually a light object, but we're going to drag and drop our area light into the Espresso window. And so this will create a node for it. And just like before with this geometry, there are no input ports here until we tell it what to add. So that's going to be with this blue button here. So let's start here with the on and off, right? So I'm going to just click on this and I'm going to say, now on and off is a little different because, well, area lights actually are a little bit different. Let me back up for a second here. If you use an area light inside of Redshift, right, the type here is set to area and you've got all of your properties. But you can actually change this to all the different types of lights that Redshift provides for you. So actually kind of all of the Redshift lights live inside of each light object, which is fine when we're out here. It makes it a little more confusing because when we come in here and if we jump over to object, you can see that there's 4 color fields, there's like 4 intensity fields, and they all have different things in them. So which one do we kind of work with? So this was a little trial and error for me, but you can see that, like, for example, if I come to shape, this one has cone angle. So this must relate to the spotlight, right? Whereas this one has spread, and, well, this one has spread too. But I think what I figured out, and we're going to test this theory right now, is that intensity, I think we're looking for the third one down on the list. That's what we're going to try right now, and we'll see if I'm right, okay? So don't be confused by all of these things. Why there are 2 object items here, that is a mystery to me as well. Now, all of that said, on and off is actually different, of course, because what we're trying to control here is this green check mark, right? Is the light kind of on or off? And so that is going to actually fall under the basic properties under enabled. So we're going to add this node into here. So let's add our range mapper. Now, again, this range mapper is a little bit different, right? Because in our user data here, we said it's going to be either all the way on or all the way off. It's either 100, it's either at full or it's at nothing. And that's it. So in this one, what we want to do is our input range, instead of degrees or percentage, we're looking here for 0 to 1. That's basically all we need here. It's either off or it's on. So we're going to say 0 to 1, 0 to 1, and then that'll just take care of the rest of these values for us. And then that should be it. So we can hook this up. And in theory, we've just added this switch here. Let's take a look here and see if we can see it here. Oh, you know what? I can't even see. Look, I can't turn it on and off. That's a good sign because I think that means the user data is controlling it. So yeah, you can see it here. Let's render here so we can see what we're talking about here. If we turn this on. Let's see. Light is on. Oh, right. But the intensity is not there yet. So we're not quite there yet. So rendering this actually is not helpful. But you can see it in the viewport here. It's on and it's off. So that actually is working. All right. So let's keep going. So now we want to do intensity. So I'm going to add the port for this. And I'm going to come down to object. I'm going to try this third option here, and we'll say intensity. And then now we need to add another range mapper. And now this one was different, right? Because what we're doing is we're going to do percentage, and we want our output to be percentage, but we want our upper to be 1,000 and not just 100. Otherwise, you just don't get enough punch out of that light. And so now we hook this up. I just want to make sure this is right. I'm not going to stop after every single node that we add, but let's see if this is now actually working. And so let's close this out and come back in here. And so we turn the light on, and then intensity, yeah, I can see it kind of glowing here. So now if we try to render, let's see, is this going to work for us? So intensity, yes, here we go. All right, it's all working. So that's great. All right, so that's good. We can close this out. Maybe worth noting here, if I haven't mentioned this before, I do have the visible box turned on for the light so that we actually see the disk when we turn the light on. Probably should have mentioned that earlier, but here we are. So, okay, so let's hook the rest of the stuff up, and then we'll test the system and see kind of where I have screwed things up. Exposure. So now let's come back here, and we're going to come down to Object. We're going to come to the third intensity, and we're going to choose Exposure. Now, exposure is the same parameters here as the light intensity, where we're going, oh no, I lied, actually. It's not. It's not. So I take it back. Let's come in here and change this now. This will be percentage, and we do want to go just 0 to 100 on that one. So let's hook this up into exposure. And then we need to come in here and add volumetrics. So now volumetrics is under the details, under contribution volume. So there's, I find it hard digging through all this stuff. So I'm trying to take this kind of slow for you. So the volume here is what we want. So we're going to add that. And now we'll add another range mapper. And also this one will be percentage. And we just want to go 0 to 100 on this one. That should be fine. And so I'm going to just hook this up. Whoop. And now we need to go to spread. So that is back under object, under shape. And again, I think it's the third one down. We'll find out. We'll do spread. We're going to add our range mapper here. Now this one, again, I found that limiting this one made things a little bit better. So we're going to just make the upper limit on this 30. And let's see how this does. But I think that's going to give us what we want. So that looks right. And so let's input this and connect this. And then we're so close here. And so now we need to add color. And so this is under, let's see, object. I'm going to go to the third one. No, I'm going to go to the first one. See, it's not even consistent within its own frame. I'm not sure if I'm right here, but I'm going to go to color, 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 and see what happens. And now this one doesn't even get a range mapper. It should just be a straight shot in. All right. Whew. Take a screen grab of this, and let's see if we did it right. Okay. So I'm going to just back up here a little bit so we can kind of see. And we will tilt my head down just a little bit here. Let's turn on the renderer. And remember, make sure you have that Redshift environment here, or none of this volumetric-y stuff is going to work here. So, all right, let's see here. So we've got our pan and tilt here is working as expected. The light on and off, that's working. The intensity of the light seems to be working. That's great. Exposure we'll come back to here. Let's turn on the volumetrics. Yes. All right. And now the volumetrics are working. And then the spread as well Now the spread does not seem to be working right. And the volumetrics, actually, I feel like they could go more, but maybe that's, yes, okay. So the exposure, right, the volumetrics definitely are also dependent on the intensity and the exposure of the light. So actually volumetrics is working correctly. The spread here, though, the spread I got wrong. So we can fix that for sure. I'm going to, just for fun here, I'm going to turn on bloom and I'm going to turn on streak and maybe just lower the intensity of these a little bit because it seemed a little hot here. But just so we get the full effect here. Streak is really out of control. Okay. And so, okay, other than the spread, I'd say, oh, we didn't try color yet here. Are we? Nope. All right. Something's wrong with color too. Bummer. All right. Let's try this again. So let's go back here and let's open up the Espresso window. So, I mean, this is just how it goes the first time, right? There's just troubleshooting here, left and right here. So I suspect I'm going to right click and say delete port. Let's try this again. So if I come back to maybe under basic, no, this color I don't think is right. I think it's under object color. Let's see here. Well, this is the fourth one down. So let's try the fourth one. I think the first time we did it in the first slot. Let's try this one in the fourth slot. And we'll hook up that color and we'll connect this. And then now let's see. Oh, this is looking promising because it's red over here already. So let's see here if we turn this on. Yes, I think we got it. Yes. Okay. So now, all right. So weirdly, color is the fourth slot. You think they could make it a little more confusing, right? Crazy. All right, so we still have to fix our spread. That one's wrong too. So I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to grab, I'm going to disconnect this. I'm going to right click and delete this port. And I'm going to come back in and I'm going to add in. So let's try this again. Object, shape. So it's not the first one. I think we tried the third one, so let's try the second one this time. And this seems, and actually, you know what? You know how I know that this is the right one? Because I just noticed this. If I come to this shape, there is a thing here called area shape, because area lights can be circles, they can be rectangles. So this must be the right one. So let's see, we can also move this up and kind of, I like to keep my ports nice and straight and keep the wires from crossing. So, all right, hopefully this is the right version of it. Let's see what we get here. Turn this back on, fire up the renderer here. This looks promising because the beam just changed its width here. Yes, there we go. And so you can see that I've maxed out the beam this far. I think maybe we could take it a little bit further. And actually, it does look like I do want to maybe open this up a little bit more. But I'm pleased. Everything else is working really well. You can see here, if you take the intensity and the exposure up a lot, then you can really kind of overdo it. If we just rely on the intensity, it's not very bright. This is the intensity at full. And this was going to 1,000 instead of 100. So I'm not quite sure why I can't get it to kind of fully go, but exposure will get you there, I think, to cover pretty much all of your bases. So all I want to do here is maybe come back in to my spread range mapper here. And instead of 30, we set the user data to 50. I don't know why this one was set to 30 in my notes, but let's try this at 50 and see if that makes a difference here. We'll refresh this. And if we come back here, let's see. No, That spread is still not great. So maybe what we have to do is troubleshoot our user data here. And what if we up this to like 75? Does that make a difference? It does. Look at that. Okay. So here you go. Now I've got, I don't ever really want a light that high, but I certainly don't want to kind of limit myself in the rig here. So yes, I made some mistakes along the way, and you know what? This is how we learn how to do things. But I'm glad I did, because you probably will too. and that will, it'll show you that you can just easily kind of go back and troubleshoot this stuff as you need it. So we can always come back into the Espresso and we can just kind of tweak some of these values around, and we can always come back into our user data here and, kind of play with some of these values as well. All right. But for the most part, it looks like we now have a working, functioning moving light. All right, 2 final thoughts that I want to share with you. We're back here in our kind of cloner scene here. If I come into this rigged light here, and I'm going to open up the manage user data. If you want to remove user data, you can just right click on any object here and say remove, or you can grab all of it and right click and say remove. So if you want to try to clear this stuff out, you can absolutely do that. The other thing is that when you have something set up, you can actually save this as a preset. So I'm going to save this as a preset. I'll call this EA mover. I already have one, but we'll call this one O2. And I'm just going to say, okay. There's one already in the attributes. Do you want to override with the new name? Sure. And so in your, what do you call this? The access panel here in the asset manager, thank you. Under presets now, it has saved for me a data file that has all of this information in here. So if I were to come to an unrigged light, you can see there's no user data here, and say add user data. Now I can load it and just double click all this stuff in. So once you get this system set up for one light, assuming the parameters are kind of the same, then you can just kind of reuse them and you don't have to start that process all the way over from scratch. So that's really handy. And then the kind of parting thought here is we've added all of this data in here. You can see, because we have this hooked up to the Espresso, then the icons here have changed a little bit next to our input fields. But these still work as keyframe markers for animation. And all of this, of course, is still animatable. So if I'm here at 0 on the timeline, I can take the yoke head and just click on these to set keyframes for those. And then we'll jump here to the end of the timeline, and maybe we'll just swing the light around this way, and we'll tilt the head up like that. And then I'll go ahead and click again. And so now if we play this back, you can see that we've actually built an animation here. So, so all of these are animatable just as if you're working with any other objects in Cinema4d. So super cool, right? All right, if you've made it this far, you've had enough of me yammering on. So please build yourself a light. Just make one and play around with it so you can get used to the system. And then start building more and more complicated rigs. And just be mindful of your system and how it's handling all this data. And I hope that this is really great. Let me know in the comments anything that you're struggling with, or if there's other stuff that we should talk about. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.